Okay, great. Well, yeah, I hope everyone's having a great day so far. So this presentation is a chat about AI and Magento. It's a really hot topic, and I see it just continuing to get hotter and hotter in the future. So yeah, before I get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Mark Shust. I've been a PHP programmer for over 20 years now, and a Magento developer for over a decade. It's hard to believe, but I manage docker-Magento. It's the most widely used Magento development environment. And I am a teacher at M.academy. It's my Magento 2 training company. And it's been my livelihood the past few years. It's really the simplest way to learn Magento, and have over 1,000 students enrolled in my courses. So if you're considering Magento training for you or your team, definitely consider M.academy. I'm the father of twin 8-year-old girls. I'm married, and I live in North Royalton, Ohio, which is about 20 minutes south of Cleveland. And you can find me at Mark Shust, my handle on all social media networks, Twitter, LinkedIn, GitHub, and YouTube. And I'll also have a link to download all these slides at the end of the presentation as well, so you don't have to worry about screenshotting anything. So let's start with what is exactly AI. So it was created by John McCarthy, who's known as the father of AI, and he coined the term back in the 50s. And it's been long important mainly in security and military reasons, but it's increasingly important in day-to-day tasks, especially with programming. AI can help you write code, analyze it, suggest optimizations, and give feedback to you. It's just can do tons of great things. Let's start with the precursor really to AI though, which is static analysis. That's you can think of sniffs or annotations in your IDE, or tools like PHP Code Sniffer and Mess Detector. They're just tools that run locally and analyze code. It runs and checks against specific rule sets or guidelines. They work really, really great. They're really a form of automation though, but they require humans to write and maintain those rule sets and programs. So AI is very different from these static analysis tools. What does AI actually mean? It's a great definition I found. It's the ability of an intelligent agent to understand or learn any intellectual task that a human being can. And this is actually a definition of AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. It's a more advanced form of AI that's more like thinking about how humans think and interact with things. And I think we've already started seeing AGI in these tools that have been recently coming out. Everything's getting just insanely crazy. There's a new tool coming out every week, and it seems like just everything is changing and everything will change. So let's get into these some of these actual tools that we can use with AI. So the first is COPILOT. It was built by GitHub, and it was really the first to come out, and it was 2 or 3 years ago. And it was really aimed at being a pair programmer for you right in your IDE. So it can suggest code, it can write entire functions, and it does it almost in real time right in your editor. So looking at the screenshot as an example, you could type out some comments, start writing a function or a piece of code, and you just wait a few seconds and Copilot will generate all this code. Like it generated all of this block of blue text on the screen, which is pretty nutty. So let's break this down a little bit of how you would use Copilot. So you wanted to validate an email address from a post, from a input post. And so how would you do it? You normally have to leave the editor, go up to Google, try to find something online, wonder if it works, why it works, and all sorts of things. But you could do that right within your IDE with Copilot. So you would just type a comment, and you type what you want in any amount of detail. So I asked it, confirm email is a valid address. And then you just go to the next line and wait a few seconds, and it outputs possible code. And you can toggle with your keyboard, you can toggle through 2, 3, 4 options, and it'll give you a different result every time. Or you can just hit tab and it'll just auto complete the code for you, and it's done. So what's crazy about this is I didn't even know the ability to validate emails was built into PHP. I was expecting to get back some kind of crazy regex function. Instead, it called this filter var function, which I actually never heard of, even after 20 years. So it works amazing with small blocks of code in PHP, JavaScript. Works great with regular expressions and anything that's really complex that humans have trouble understanding. And it works in just about any language. You can write Node.js, serverless functions, really anything. So I was wondering, what about Magento? So how can this work with Magento? Well, starting off with a simple start, you could just type namespace and it generates the namespace for you. It looks at the file system and the current file, and it knows where it's at, and it knows the context of that. And it can create a controller. So I just start typing class and it auto-completed this. So it kind of created the controller. You could see it extends app action, which is actually the deprecated method of Magento writing controllers, but we'll just go with it for now. And let's say we wanted to return a JSON response with the current customer's name. So I wrote out a comment here that said return JSON response with current customer's name. And I just hit enter and let it autocomplete, and it generated code for me, but you could tell it kind of starts to break down at this point. And it's probably been your experience either seeing AI or using some of these tools so far. So you notice how it uses Object Manager to get the session object. And then it sets the header and the body on the response object. So you don't really want to write code like this. It'll quickly break down, and it definitely doesn't follow any best practices. So Copilot does work really well, but not so much for generating Magento code. The crazy thing about this, though, is even though the code was bad, it did still work. I did have to tab through a couple options to find one that was decent. Other ones just failed miserably. And yeah, GitHub Copilot's great, just not really for Magento. Magento's just too complex, and things really break down pretty quickly. I still recommend Copilot. I managed to get some free license for my open source stuff, and I've been tinkering around with it. And I kind of ignored it the last couple of years, but since I installed it, it's pretty neat that it just it kind of infers just the code you want to type without you giving it any input at all. It's pretty nutty. So I still do highly recommend it because it can definitely help save you some time, but I would use it more sparingly. There has to be a better way to write this Magento code, and that's where we come to ChatGPT. I know everyone's heard of this. It's the fastest growing app on the planet ever, and it's probably one of, if not the biggest breakthrough of AI to date. If you don't know what it stands for General Purpose Training, and that means it's really an AI that can answer a question about anything. And you'll also hear the term LLM, that stands for Large Language Model. That's really the type of AI that it uses, is a language-based AI. And it represents all of these prompts and chatbots that come out that can create code with AI. And I do mean it can pretty much do anything, because it actually is trained on tons of language and parameters in this giant space of data that it has. So it's based on OpenAI's GPT-3 API model. It's really 3.5. It's sort of a newer version of GPT-3. And it's an interactive chat box. So there's just a chat box, type of question, instructions, any prompt at all, and it'll give you an answer. So I told it to actually write a song about Magento Stammtisch and in Stuttgart, Germany, in the style of Snoop Dogg. And it outputted all this data, this whole song. It's pretty funny. Note how it didn't give it any rule set. I didn't give it any data. I didn't give it anything really. I just told it what to do. It inferred Magento's an e-commerce platform, or it knew it, and it even made it rhyme. And it's very on point. It makes sense. And not only did it write those two verses, it wrote a bridge, a chorus, and an outro. So it's kind of funny if you read it through. But yeah, it did this without any intervention at all. And it's mind-blowingly good if you ask me. It's great for idea generation. I asked it to generate a poem about potchkis at my wife's bakery, like where she works, and it did that. It was just really funny. But how does it work with Magento code? Well, it actually is trained on code as well. So I'm sure you may have seen this, maybe not, but basically you can tell it to act a certain way and it'll do whatever you say. So in this case, the prompt was, I want you to act like a Linux terminal. I type commands and you will reply with what the terminal should show. You give it some additional context and instructions. And then you tell it my first command is pwd, and it outputs what a terminal would normally respond when you type pwd with it, which is a slash. So it's basically emulating a full terminal in Linux, which is pretty crazy. And you can keep going further and further, and even it could do things like output the result of running a Docker command, or even ping the BBC website. But it's important to note that it actually doesn't have internet access and it can't connect to the internet. So when it's actually emulating this ping, it's not actually pinging the computer. It's just taking aggregate data and outputting what it think it should show, which is pretty crazy. It even just spaces everything out and everything. It's pretty nuts. So it can do some even more amazing things though. Just look back at our Magento code that Copilot generated for us. Definitely doesn't follow any best practices. It works, but it's not coded well, and we're even lucky that it works. So how can ChatGPT help us with this code? Well, I typed a prompt of what I want it to do. I told it review this code and make it follow Magento 2's coding guidelines and best practices. I did a couple line breaks and just pasted in the code. And this is what it outputs. It usually outputs code in Markdown. If not, you can tell it to. And it changes code around to import classes, use created private properties, and it initialized variables with dependency injection. It assigned the variables to properties, and then it called the parent constructor of the class. It added doc blocks of parameters and return types, and it also called the proper functions of the class properties. And yeah, at the end, it returned an instance of result JSON and properly set the name on that object. So you can tell this is just leaps and bounds above GitHub Copilot. It did so much more. And it has the same output as before, but this time it doesn't use Object Manager. It uses a proper result JSON object, and this will generally pass most code reviews at this point. And know that I didn't really even have to do anything. I just told it to create this code. So it'd be nice if we got a summary of the changes that we just made though, and why they were made. And I asked it, can I get a brief summary of the changes that were made that improve this code and why they were made? And it replied, the following changes were made to improve code and follow M2's coding guidelines and best practices. And it told us how it imported the classes, how the constructor was used to inject dependencies instead of fetching them dynamically. It added type hints. It returned a result JSON object instead of setting the header and body directly. And it told us why it can make the code more maintainable, easier to understand, easier to test. And by using dependency injection, the code is more flexible and can be reused in different contexts. And by using the result JSON object, the code follows the recommended patterns of setting up JSON responses in Magento 2. So it actually explained in much more detail and more succinctly than I did. So I find this just absolutely amazing, and it could be great in things like code reviews. And there's also another tool out there called WHAT-THE-DIFF. It's an AI tool created by the Beyond Code team. And the output's similar to ChatGPT, but it's more concise and it's more framed out, and it happens right in GitHub. I've been using this on docker-Magento for quite a while now, and it generates some pretty good responses. I mean, Ranger Chan made this PR here and told me what he updated, and I actually had to go into the file change set like I usually do and review all of the updates, but it actually told me pretty succinctly exactly what it was doing, including the change for Docker Compose, that it was only available in Docker Desktop 2 and above, and exactly what changed in my bin start script. It's pretty crazy that it detected all of this. So I can take giant, huge PRs and summarize what they actually do. And it's pretty much always better than a human description. Ranger's made quite a few PRs since, and he doesn't even bother with descriptions anymore. He just creates the PR, and WHAT-THE-DIFF makes a better PR description than him. So it's funny. And it does also have comment functionality built in when you're doing code reviews. You can tell it to make changes and rewrite code. I tested it out. It didn't work well for me. I don't know if I just wasn't using it right, probably, but it's probably going to keep getting better in the future, though, and it can definitely help you out in code reviews. So going back to ChatGPT, notice that I didn't provide any context to this question either. So this is one of the craziest things, and it's a little bit overlooked. It keeps the context of what I asked it. So I didn't mention Magento or my code here. It just knew what I was talking about. So how far can we go? So let's take things a step further. And I asked it to refactor the code to use PHP 8's constructor property promotion. And it outputted proper refactoring using promoted properties. The code's a lot better. It's not perfect. So I'm sure all Magento devs know what I'd probably change next. And that is refactor this code to implement an interface rather than extending the action class. And notice how I'm not telling it what interface to implement. I just wanted to figure it out. And it did generate code with the correct interface, which is HTTP get action interface. So this code is pretty good now. It follows pretty much all of Magento 2's best practices. It's properly coded. It's up to date with PHP 8. So if you think about this, I wonder how crazy is this? I actually didn't write any of this code, and it generated full code with best practices. So it tells us really that this prompting will be super important. How you prompt and when you prompt and what you prompt. It's probably going to be more important today than knowing how to Google search something. But it didn't go quite as smooth as this. So we need to get to some of the disadvantages here as well. So as you can tell, I've been mainly talking about ChatGPT because I find it the most interesting and useful tech with the lowest amount of overhead, which is why it's been so popular. It works great, but does have some disadvantages. And most of these do apply to other AI tools as well. That is having a dependence on this program, its slowness, and it being what I call an all-knowing idiot. So let's start with this dependence. So when you rely on any web service, you're at the mercy of the service. So during research for this talk, it took me a while to get it to generate this code because there were constant capacity issues. It's just very popular now. So if it was down, I couldn't work on the talk. I had to take a break. So if it's down when you're coding, you may not be able to code with it. So it creates a dependency I really don't like right now, and I wouldn't recommend it to depend on these tools. So the paid version is being still rolled out. I applied for access weeks ago, and I still haven't gotten any access yet. I think they're still experimenting and changing things around. I'd gladly pay for it in a heartbeat, whatever it costs. And it just solves so many issues, but yeah, it's just not yet available, the paid version. Hopefully it's out soon, but you're still at the mercy of the service, even if you subscribe to it. So I think of this as sort of the early development in the early 2000s. We were starting to switch over to remote development environments, at least some of us, and you were always dependent on the internet. So if the internet went out, which actually happened a lot back in those days, you couldn't really work or do anything. So you'd take a break and go to the gym or something, and yeah, wait for it to come back. That really doesn't happen anymore because our internet reliability issues kind of went away. And I see it probably happening the same thing here. It'll get better and better, but you are still at the mercy of this tool at the moment. And here's the actual speed of ChatGPT. So sometimes it was slower, sometimes it was faster, but you need to type, you need to wait for a queue, wait for a response. Sometimes it would pause here and hang up for quite a while. There's just a lot of waiting going on. So sometimes you need to type, walk away, go to get a coffee. The prompt would fail. You'd have to regenerate it. So it reminds me a lot of when Jeopardy used Watson, though. If you don't remember that, or it was quite a while ago, it took them hours and hours to actually film one of these half-hour shows because Watson kept overheating and breaking down. So it kind of reminds me sort of this, like this, but it'll get a lot better with time. And a fun fact, ChatGPT would actually annihilate Watson now. I think Watson got something like 85 or 87% of the answers correct. ChatGPT scored 100. So it just knows everything. Yeah, but it still leaves a lot to be desired compared to other tools for writing code. For example, here's my tool, Beeline. It's a shameless plug, but it generates Magento code for you in just a couple keystrokes. You give it a keyword, and it generates all the code immediately. You don't have to wait on the internet. Don't have to depend on the internet. It works completely offline. It's reliable. You'll get the same response every time, so it's consistent, and it follows all the best practices as I created this tool. So there are tools out there that are much better than ChatGPT and other AI tools for other certain scenarios, but I'd see eventually these AI tools either replacing tools like Beeline or just getting integrated with it so it could do more. So it is an all-knowing idiot. I hope the future AI overlords don't kill me for this slide, but I actually asked it for promoted properties and it gave me a response without it. So it's a bit of mix of a genius and an idiot. And I got mad and I asked it, why didn't you listen to me? And it said, pretty much I may miss some details or make some assumptions. So that's a big thing with this tool. Everything it replies back with will sound very confident and very correct. But a lot of the times the responses aren't correct, even with the Magento code. So you still have to know the underlying thing that you're dealing with and having the knowledge to know what to take away from it and what not to. So the tools will respond just like they know it all, but the responses may be incorrect. And I have a confession to make. Things, didn't go that smoothly in the creation of this presentation. There were reasons I didn't also do any of this live. It's too slow. The results are inconsistent. You can ask it the same thing and it'll generate completely different results every time. And it didn't listen half the time. So it's also part of the learning curve in learning how to deal with these issues, though, when it's not responding how you want it to. So sometimes you need to write more context for the prompt. It's notoriously bad at some reason with PHP 8's constructor property promotion, I found out. It drives me crazy. That's all I like to code in now. And it's probably because it lacks constructor property promotion in the code examples and the data set that it was initially trained on, because it's sort of at that cutoff of 2001. It probably hasn't seen a lot of PHP 8 code yet use this, even though it was out. So it does get confused. But you can provide it additional context. For example, I told it to refactor using CPP. Then I also added a line. This defines the visibility within the constructor rather than defining it before the constructor. So I'm kind of telling it what constructor property promotion is if it didn't know, and then it did usually get the correct result. But sometimes I would still give this prompt and it still wouldn't do it. So it could be frustrating at time. It still is the early days of this, but I see this getting a lot better with time. And it does have a ton of advantages. Certain tasks, computers just do way better than humans. Regex is a huge, huge thing. If you've ever written regex, you won't understand what it does or just how it's coded. You can feed it regex and it'll tell you what it does and a complete breakdown of it. It can simplify pretty complex code into simple code. You can use it for pair programming, similar to COPILOT, and it's really a great code reviewer. So it saves a ton of time with certain tasks. It'll only get faster though, and the data set will only continue to improve. So you got to keep that in mind as well. This isn't going to get worse and go backwards. GPT-4 is rumored to come out really soon. Who knows when, but it could be another game changer. I don't expect it to be as good as everyone's hyping it up to be, and I'm probably going to be disappointed, but it will be a lot better probably than GPT-3 or 3.5. And we got to look for the speed to increase probably 10 to 100x. I expect the speed to get improved dramatically. Copilot is very fast compared to ChatGPT. And the data set will continue getting much larger, and it's going to get even trained on data sets for specific industries. There's going to be different UI and implementations, similar to ChatGPT. And I picture the future of just you having a prompt box in something like PHPSTORM, and you tell it what to do and hit OK, and it's going to create files for you and probably completely generate them. I 100% see this happening. And I found this somewhere online. The future of programming is writing prompts. I very much am starting to agree. You just ask GPT-4 in natural language what you want to do, and it'll output it. And it might even just, there's just crazy possibilities of what it can do. And a common argument is that the AI is stupid. It's an all-knowing idiot, but all idiots aren't necessarily stupid. So Alan Thompson, he's a leading expert in AI. I very recommend following his website, and he's a former chairman of Mensa, actually. He tested GPT-3, which is the underlying API of ChatGPT, and it had an IQ of 150, and ChatGPT scored 147. So it's most likely higher than everyone watching this presentation. It's in the 99.9 percentile. And it also passed the US bar exam, a CPA exam, and it passed the US medical licensing exam, which was known to be very, very difficult. And it passed all of it. So I don't know of anyone that actually have passed all these 3 exams. And what's funny is I actually tested it with some sample questions from an Adobe Commerce exam practice test. And I even made things up, and it scored 100% on it. Didn't get anything wrong. So it not only answered the questions, though, it actually gave you an explanation of why it chose the answer. So it really does know everything. It's not even trained specifically on Magento. So it's definitely a Magento master at these cert tests. But we saw how it did in real coding. So this is almost additional proof that tests really don't mean much. The real world application is a much better test of a coder than an actual test or an exam. And you can fool someone passing a test, but not really in writing real code. So ChatGPT does appear to be a lot smarter than GPT-3, but it's actually not. It is actually using GPT 3.5, which is available in the OpenAI's, I believe it's called, DaVinci 003, that's available in the playground. So GPT-3 is really an unrestricted version of ChatGPT and could do all sorts of other things. So, but it does show you goes to show you the presence of the UI and the ability to keep context. ChatGPT is just so much more useful than GPT-3 at this point for 99% of people. And you can still build tons of custom things on GPT-3 as well, and GPT-4 that will be out in the future. So what's next? You know, look out for GPT-4. Again, it probably won't be as hyped, but it will be improved. Bard, I believe, is releasing maybe today by Google. And they also have something called DeepMind Sparrow, which is also owned by Google. So be on the lookout for that. But again, temper expectations. And it's just the Wild West now, though. There's a new tool every day or every week coming out, and it's just Wild West. So just get involved, ask questions, experiment with tools. Now's really the time to get in. Otherwise, this is definitely going to pass you by. And you can get started. Here's some repos. Awesome. ChatGPT is a great repo, and it gives examples of different prompts you can write to ChatGPT. And the OpenAI cookbooks made by OpenAI gives you code examples of interacting with their OpenAI API, and learnprompting.org. I think it's pretty basic, but it gives you a good starter material of how these prompts worked and how you can manipulate the prompt to give it what you want. And you can also think of some cool things that are cool but can still be super useful. So I thought of bin/Magento, that common script. It's hard to remember some of the commands. So I just gave it a simple prompt similar to that terminal emulator. Emulate the bin/Magento command. So, and I just told it to do certain things, like create an admin user named Mark Shust, and it would spit off that really long line that none of us can remember or know. And you could just copy and paste it in to terminal. And like things like increasing the session lifetime to 30 days, never remember the config path or how many seconds are in 30 days. So it could just generate these right away. And remember, it's not even trained on Magento. So this is really, really, really neat. And yeah, you can download all the presentation slides from M.academy/AI. I uploaded this exact slide over here. And I hope you like this talk. I'm definitely open to any questions that you may have.
Wow, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any questions from the audience?
It's a tough one. Mark, how long do you think it will take till tools like that will subsidize standard developers so that a good PO can write an essay, what he really wants, and then the program will write the code. And you only need like lead devs for reviews and stuff like that.
I think that's a really good question. I still think it's going to be a while. I'm very, very optimistic about this stuff, and I think it will take, we're still years away. So I've been using it to help me write blog articles and content and YouTube videos, actually. But I asked it something, and I pretty much use it to get ideas, like bullet points. And then if you asked it to write the whole article or blog post, you can tell it's written by an AI. It's very obvious, and it's not in my voice. And of course, I can give it my voice to train on it, but it's still not the same. And it's, again, an all-knowing idiot, so it screws up on certain parts. It will get better and better. But I'd say even writing, it's not quite there yet. It could probably fool some people. But again, a lot of the info it puts out is wrong or incorrect. So I use it mainly just for idea generation, and that's probably a good way to use it for code too. You can tell it to do a certain thing, and it can generate code for you, and then you can tell how I needed to modify it as well too. A lot of that modification's much more easily done in an IDE by a human at the moment, but it's probably going to be a little while until it can really replace humans. I did create a YouTube video. It's going to come out, I think, tomorrow or Friday. It's scheduled to go out, and I actually did create a whole module for me in Magento, but it was very basic. So you can check that out in a couple days.
That's good.
Any more questions? Well, I was very impressed by the example of the command line, actually. Do you have a rough idea where it finds its knowledge? Is it really just Googling and sampling the information it finds there, or?
So it's trained on a giant data set. Again, the GPT-4 is going to be a much larger data set, so it's going to be even more knowledgeable about more stuff. But I heard how it's trained is that it's not just fed the data and it figures it out. There's actually hundreds or thousands of people that go through these prompt responses, and they sort of tell it yes or no, and they tell it what the response should probably be versus what it was, and that's how it became really smart. So it actually wasn't trained on anything Magento specific, that's kind of one of the crazy parts here. It knows a lot of this stuff, and people don't know how it knows, which is it's just pretty crazy because I thought about building something off of OpenAI. There's other tools, so I can feed it like the dev docs, and it will build my own AI that's trained on that data set. So it'll probably pick out examples and be much better and more accurate. But yeah, ChatGPT doesn't do any of that, just infers based on whatever data it crawled or was fed.
Wow. I read on the web that it is even possible to host ChatGPT on your own, or GPT at least, from OpenAI, but I don't know how you can bring that to that skills.
You can't host ChatGPT, so that's a reason we won't see any real big competitors unless they have really, really deep pockets, because the infrastructure and how it was trained on 175 billion documents. Someone estimated it would take over $1 billion to create ChatGPT and host it. So you can do it, but it's tons of money. You need a team to train it, and so OpenAI is definitely ahead of everyone here. Google's probably doing the same thing. They just haven't released it yet. So you can use the GPT-3 API, though, that DaVinci 0003, and that's going to give you results that are very, very similar to the ChatGPT. And you can even code it in a way that does keep the context, but it does have a limited number of characters that you can pass it. So I think ChatGPT does also, but it's probably much larger because it's an internal sort of restriction that they built. So yeah, you could build something that keeps the context, but it probably won't be quite as good as ChatGPT, but it would be unrestricted. So a problem with ChatGPT is they have been censoring and restricting tons and tons of stuff lately. It shouldn't matter much in code, but yeah.
Any more questions for Mark? Mark, I want to thank you very, very much that you joined us from the US. It's already evening here in Germany. Thank you for all your research you did and the insights you gave us and shared your knowledge. Much appreciated.
Sure. And it was great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We will make a short break, and afterwards we will have a little talk about image proxy. Not sure if you heard of that. It's a great tool, and I will share some insights how we use it together with Magento.
Okay, great. Sounds good.